So welcome to the Split series. This is the second in a series of 6 webinars that myself and Sam are hosting. For those of you who don't know us, I'm Nichole Farrow, a relationship and family coach. I work with couples who are separating and looking to co-parent or blend their families. And my co-host is Samantha Woodham, who is a family solicitor, barrister, and also the co-founder of the Divorce Surgery. So between us, we've decided to put this series on to really help more people try and split amicably and to share some useful information. And they're all free, and the next one is coming up in May, and Sam's going to share some more details about that at the end. But for today's series, it is all about moving out of the family home. And to kick us off, we're going to dive straight in with what are the legal implications of moving out. And I'm going to hand over to Sam, who's going to answer that particular question.
Thanks, Nichole. Well, hello, everyone. I guess so moving out is super common. It's an interim decision that you're going to make quite early on in a divorce or separation, because living together through divorce and separation is really hard. But one of the things that people worry about the most is, well, what are the legal implications? What does this mean? I think you need to look at it from 2 perspectives. One, and this applies to everything when it comes to the legal aspects of divorce, it's looking at it from the financial perspective, and looking at it from the children perspective if you have children. A sort of just basic background, there are 2 completely distinct areas of law when it comes to divorce. There's financial remedies, which is all the law which relates to dividing up finances. There's people call it private law children. That just means all the law relating to your child arrangements. And then there's a third bit, which is the divorce itself, which is actually the most straightforward bit because of no fault divorce, which is the online process that you go through in gov.uk. But there are 3 different legal areas to be aware of. When it comes to moving out on the finances, first of all, I guess the first thing to think about is, legally, what's your status? Are you, if you're renting, do you have a joint tenancy? If you own a property, is that in joint names? You can look at whether your tenants in common or beneficial owners. That's sort of slightly separate. The key is thinking that we have a jointly owned asset, or joint tenancy. And so we need to do this in a planned way. We will have set outgoings that will probably be in joint names. So your first question is, okay, well, if we're looking at moving out, we need to set the parameters for this. We will not know at this stage what the long-term division of our finances looks like. So we need to agree that we don't know what the long term is, and we're doing this for the short term. If we're doing it for the short term, how are we going to manage our outgoings in the short term? Who's going to take over the household bills? Are we releasing the other person from that liability, taking them off the bills? How are the outgoings for the new place going to be funded? Quite often what will happen is one person moves out and they rent. Well, how's that going to impact your day-to-day outgoings? What you don't want to happen is an interim move take place and that results in debts being built up. The crucial one, I think, is agreeing that you don't know the long-term plan, because if you can park that, and if you can ideally make a plan between yourselves of saying, look, we don't know if long-term the family home can be retained. We haven't got there yet. But what we do know is at the moment we can afford for each of us to live separately while we're figuring that out. But what's our plan for figuring that out? Are we going to go to mediation? Are we going to share a lawyer? Are we going to each get some separate legal advice? But you've got a plan. And then you know what your interim position is, and it is very much interim. Think also about access in the short term. If one person moves out, what are the ground rules in terms of them being able to come back? Because you're doing this, so you each have some privacy and some space. So set out what your expectations are in terms of movements in and out of the home. If you have children, that's kind of a separate piece of work, but I think it's really important to know, and people often don't know this, that there's no legal presumption either way. There is no legal presumption that children should, for instance, move out with the primary carer if the primary carer moves out. It's all based on the welfare of the children. The one fundamental is that a judge would expect 2 parents to consult with each other about plans for the children unless your safety is at risk. And if your safety is at risk, there are a whole host of legal measures you can take to protect yourself that absolutely do not involve consulting with an abusive partner. But if you're in a situation where there isn't abuse, it's about thinking, okay, we need to consult with each other. Now, if you're saying, look, this is really stressful, tensions are really high, we're arguing all the time, this is bad for the kids, I just want to move down the road, round the corner, wherever it is. It's not going to impact the amount of time that the children can spend with the other parent. It's just going to give us both some space, which ultimately will be good for the children. Then what you're looking at is, okay, again, we're not figuring out the forever, we're not figuring out the long term. We need a short-term parenting plan where we know how we're going to share the care of the children in this interim period. But what you might be saying is, actually, I've been offered a job and it's in the next county. I want to move back and be near my parents. And that involves a much bigger move, which could impact the time that the children spend with the other parent. Then you're probably going to need some legal advice in that interim period, because you're going to want to know, well, how would a judge approach this? How can we find our way through this to get to a solution that works for everybody? And I guess so that you guys know, in terms of when we're talking about legal implications, how do judges look at this? They have to consider, first and foremost, welfare of the children. So that includes the children's views. And they also need to weigh up proposals side by side. So the law used to be more weighted in favour of the primary carer when it came to moves, but that's all changed in the last 5 years. And now it's very much a kind of side-by-side analysis of one parent's proposals versus the other, trying to weigh them up. And as you can imagine, that's quite hard. And it's also hard to predict where a judge might go. So the sooner you know the sorts of factors that judges will care about and look into, the sooner you guys can kind of think, look, we can take this into our own hands and predict what those outcomes are likely to be. But that's a sort of very quick run through. I think the only other thing I'd say about, from a legal perspective, about a move is that courts are increasingly alert to coercive control. They haven't been in the past. And there was a big Ministry of Justice report that showed that judges were not alive, and that was really impacting women. But now they are, and they will see if one person is trying to stop the other making a very small move, not very far away, but just to gain some independence, to gain some space, and the other person is unreasonably trying to stop them. Judges are much more alive to that and really don't carry any truck with that argument anymore. And they really buy into the idea that actually, for children in the short term, a move can be the best thing for sure, so that the adults get space from each other. But it's just trying to do it in a planned way and thinking about the legal implications so that, you know, you don't get caught out later on. And I guess, Nichole, I can turn to you in terms of practical co-parenting angles on these sorts of short-term interim moves and you know, those first few days after separation.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest challenges around co-parenting is quite often communication perhaps hasn't been your strong suit before the separation, and then you're asked to make some really key decisions where you need to come together and communicate and be as much of a united front as possible for the children in particular, and to create a level of stability in a time when there is so much change that you're both trying to deal with, but the kids are also trying to deal with as well. So when it comes to kind of agreeing what that should look like, Sam mentioned a parenting plan earlier, and honestly, that is your best friend in terms of understanding all the things you've got to consider and working through a co-parenting plan and considering all of the different aspects of not just, you know, the situation of who's living in the house, but also the schedule, but also how you're going to communicate with one another, how you're going to communicate with the children. Because the thing is that you need to change roles in terms of your relationship with your ex. You're no longer holding that marital role, but you still have that co-parenting role, and therefore how you communicate one another and what you communicate to the children is really key. And that includes big changes like one of you is moving out, or perhaps you decide actually neither of you, the children are going to stay in the home and you're going to do nesting, so one of you moves out periodically. So the other one can be with the children stay put, or perhaps you're looking to have two separate homes, or perhaps you're looking to actually stay under the same roof. But whatever you decide in terms of what you're going to do, it's putting the children in the center of that, of working out, well, how are we going to logistically co-parent so that they have as least disruption as possible, that their routines are the same, that there is some consistency around messaging, communication, and they know where they're at, whether they're staying in the home and mum and dad are moving in and out of the home, or whether they've got two homes, or you're staying together, but what are the implications? And remember that it's not just what you're saying to your children, it's your behavior that they are witnessing as well. So you can be saying all the right things, but if your behavior is suggesting something else, they are little sponges and they are picking up on all of the little nuances around your tone and around your communication and around the way that you two are interacting. So if that's really challenging and you're staying in the same house, then you need to go through that parenting plan and look at where you can create space, where you can create a schedule of who's responsible for the children at what times of the day, exactly as you would as if they were moving between two homes. The same applies if you're still in the same home. Work out what that schedule is around the children, how you can both support that and give each other the space that you both need, because you're trying to emotionally process a separation, and chances are you're going to be at different stages along the same journey. No two people go through divorce at exactly the same emotional stage as the other. It just doesn't happen. So allowing for that, agree the ground rules, as Sam says, around kind of the boundaries that you now need to put in place. As I said, as co-parents rather than a married couple, that changes. Your role within each other's lives has changed. So think about that. And that's the same whether you were in the house or whether you are in two separate houses, or if you're doing nesting, so the children are staying put. You know, what are the transitions, what are the handovers, and how are you going to communicate with each other and with the children? The other thing that always gets missed is, I think quite often as parents we think that the kids are going to be thinking about some of the bigger aspects, and actually what they're really worried about is, where's the pet hamster going to live if I'm going to be spending half the week in a different house? Or, you know, you have to try and think about it from your child's perspective. Depending on their age, they will have different questions, trying to prep as much as possible for those questions so you can come armed with some of the answers. But also it's okay to say, we haven't figured that out yet, but, you know, we've heard you, and we're going to together, you know, think about that. Or what would you like to happen in this scenario? You know, we'll try and make that work, but trying to include them so they don't feel that this is all happening to them, and reassuring them that you guys are still a family. You're just a different shape. You may have different homes, but you're still a family at the end of the day. And that's the most important thing to get across to them. It is such a big change. And if they are going to have to live in two different houses, you might also want to think about the stuff that they have. Are they having two of everything, or are they going to move stuff between the two homes? What's the logistics around that? Would you feel comfortable displaying a photo of your ex in their bedroom or in your house to give them a level of comfort? Again, it really varies from the age of the child as to how they're going to, you know, what level of comfort they need. But remember, even teenagers, as much as they might look like adults, they're still children at the end of the day, and they might present as though they're okay about it, but this is a huge change for them also. So trying to think about it from their perspective and creating as much consistency and having as much unified communication as you possibly can between the two of you is really key, regardless of whatever situation you decide upon in terms of your living arrangements, and keeping any conflict away from them is really key throughout, I'd say. In terms of do's and don'ts, because that's all quite very general, and you may have some questions on this. From a legal perspective, Sam, and I can think of a few off the top of my head, what are the kind of key do's and don'ts in terms of moving out of a family home or separating?
Yeah, I think the biggest do is to recognize that for most people, the family home is their biggest financial asset. And when you approach a separation, there is so much going on. And what's really crucially important is that you don't think we've got to figure out now what's going to happen with this massive asset. Like, we've got to work that out now because that's on our list and we need to get through it. And I can't see past that. And what happens when you're separating is you're faced with a ginormous emotional shift. You've got a big co-parenting change. And at the same time, you're thinking, I've got to make really long-term financial decisions, which carry really big implications. And I guess my major do is that you're not having to make that decision then. What you're needing to do is park that and say, you know what's going to happen for us to figure out what the right answer on the finances is we're going to have to go through a financial disclosure process. We need to get mortgage advice. We need to get tax advice. We need to get this thing valued. We need to be in the headspace where we're ready for all of that. And this is not immediate. What might well be immediate is we are not getting along. We need space. We need to get out of each other's hair. So the most important do is that an interim decision, a short-term decision on finances is very different from long-term. And it's really important that you both agree that. We are agreeing this for the next 3 to 6 months, during which time we're going to do all of these things, one of which includes legal advice to figure out what the long-term answer is on the finances. And then you've set out your stall, because the worst thing you can do at this early stage is make some big concessions that aren't the right ones. You know, it is so often to feel very emotive about the family home and to start giving things away and saying, you know what, actually, no, I don't need any pension. That's fine. You know, if I could stay here, then everything's going to be all right. That might not be the right solution at all. So if you're thinking about it, think short term and agree, okay, for both of us, this is a 6-month plan. So then that moves on to the next do, which is, okay, all we need to do is work out our outgoings over the next 6 months. We just need to figure out how we're going to cover the mortgage and the rent, how we're going to split the bills. This is short term. We're not trying to boil the ocean here. We're just trying to see what's affordable for the next 6 months until we've figured out what the right ultimate answer is. Because in terms of mindset, I can tell you, and you know, I bang on about this, the not rushing to lawyers thing. In the first 6 weeks after a separation, you're not ready for any form of legal advice. Some people need 3 months before they're ready for it. It's different if your safety's at risk, but if you're safe and you're just processing it, then you need to wait for legal advice until you're ready to think about the long term. Because otherwise what can happen is you process all your feelings through a kind of quite unfriendly sometimes legal process, particularly if it's two-sided. It can be like the worst place to go because it's not going to support you in your future relationship. It's going to potentially undermine it. So think about it being short term. If you're thinking about nesting, which is one of the things that Nichole mentioned, which is where, and you know, we're finding at the divorce surgery, more and more families are doing this in the short term, which is saying that the kids are going to stay put, we'll get a flat round the corner and we'll swap in and out. Great, but again, ground rules. Figure out how long you're doing this for, because what you don't want, sometimes can happen, is that you enter into it and one person thinks I'm doing this for 6 months, a year, till we figure out the divorce, get sorted on the other side. And the other person's like, amazing, so we'll do this till the children are 18. And actually what you want to be clear about is, look, you know, it's baby steps here. We can always extend it, but let's agree to what's our initial term. And then once you've done that, again, it's the same stuff. It's house rules. You know, if you've got one person who whacks the heating up all the time, you're jointly responsible for these bills. Let's make sure that they're proportionate. Who's doing all the homework with the kids? You know, who's keeping it tidy? You don't want to be nesting and then come in every other week to a house that's a complete tip. That's just going to make you cross, and it's disrespectful and unfair. And again, in terms of triggers, you know, you've got to have a situation where if one of you says, you know what, this just isn't working for me anymore. I know we said it was short term, but I'm really not comfortable with having to be in this flat. Or if one of you gets a new new relationship. You know, I'm not comfortable with that new relationship coming back to this flat that I'm then sleeping in half of the time. You know, all of that stuff, the more that you can kind of think it through, and it's really easy for me to rattle off all these things, but it may be that it's worth just having an hour with a shared lawyer or an hour with a co-parenting expert at the beginning, just as a one-off, to be like, well, what are the things that we should be thinking about? Because actually, if you're forewarned, you can figure it out. And I guess that's my biggest do, is have a bit of a plan. So break it down. Don't overwhelm yourself thinking you're making long-term decisions. You're not. Think about it literally 6 months ahead, but then think, okay, for the next 6 months, why are we doing this? We're doing this because we want some space. We're doing this because we don't want to fall out with each other. And we're doing this because we need some time to figure out the long-term plans. Well, let's just make sure that these arrangements we're making for the short term don't undermine that ultimate goal. Which is to get to a place where we figured all this out, we're starting our lives separately, and our relationship's still okay. And, you know, that's ultimately where you want to get to. And when it comes to the children, you know, looking at it separately, because it's different aspects legally, but again, planning for it, you know, like Nichole said, including the children in your discussions. Now, that's much easier said than done, but there's been a lot of research done about this from the Nuffield Foundations, lots of things that, you know, if you wanted to ping me an email, I can send you, but essentially saying children need to buy in a bit to the outcome. That doesn't mean they're making the decision. It's obviously got to be age appropriate. But it just means that they need to feel like they've been heard because they're living it too. And I think also sometimes, you know, when you're parents and you're trying to do the right thing and you're trying to get it all right, sometimes knowing that your kids have a particular thing that they like can just cut through quite a lot and say, actually, you know, we know that the other thing I often say to people is, don't think about this as sharing care. Think about this as logistics, because sharing care is massively emotive. And when actually, if you think about it, you know, when you were together, when you're at work, you don't stop being a parent. When your kids are at school, you don't stop being a parent. But you do have loads of logistical things where you're like, right, you do judo pickup because you can do that. You go to football practice, I'll do the tennis, you know. And if you think of it in terms of logistics, it takes away a little bit of the emotional sting of figuring out how you're going to manage the care in the short term. So I guess that would be another do. And also my major do actually is that relationships can be great and have a shelf life, and that is completely fine. And the biggest do, and this is whether you're moving out, whether you're not moving out, is that divorce can be the best thing that ever happens to people. And we don't say that enough. It's not in the media enough because the media likes, you know, catastrophes. But actually, this could be the start of a really fantastic new chapter. And if it's approached in the way that, you know, a marriage can be a success and have a shelf life, and then it frees you up to have new relationships in the future, and you have an opportunity to model for your children, because they're going to one day have relationships that might not work out, and they're going to see how that can transition and how it can lead to something even better. Ditch the guilt and the stigma is my biggest do, but I say that regardless of whether you're moving out or not. And I guess in terms of the do's from a co-parenting perspective, Nichole, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, I think very similar to you, it's about having that plan. And so I've talked about a co-parenting plan specifically because I think it does make you think about those things that you probably hadn't considered before. And it is putting all of your logistics in one place. And I will, when I send out the link to this recording, I'll include a link to the co-parenting plan as well, because it covers not only just the logistics, but also thinking about the values, the boundaries, the roles that you're both going to have, and the review that you're going to put in place, because a co-parenting plan is constantly evolving because your children are growing and your situation's changing. So it's not a case if you do this co-parenting plan at the beginning and then you're stuck wedded to that. It can change alongside your, you know, your children growing and also your situation changing, i.e., you know, it was a short-term plan for us to do the nesting or to have that flat, and now things are different, we need to make some alterations. And it allows there to be child involvement as well. As Sam says, there's been some incredible research and said kids don't want to feel like this is being done to them. They want to feel that they are still a family, which you are at the end of the day. As hurtful and as painful as it can be, you are still a family, you're just going to be a different shape. And the other thing that parenting plan also does consider is that potential future relationships that you may both have, and it allows you to think about future proofing your co-parenting relationship and your family dynamic, allowing for the fact that some of the stuff that's going to come later on down the road. So it just gets you in that frame of mind of knowing, as Sam says, kind of planning is being forewarned around what's coming, and you just deal with it at the stage that you're at, and you work through. But I'd say really trying to communicate, which is really hard when you're going through such an emotional time. And said, in work that I do, usually communication has somehow broken down to some extent, and needs some work anyway. Trying to focus around the children and their needs, as well as remembering the fact that you are human beings going through this. So you will also have needs in this, and you can't look after your children and come out with the best outcome if you are emotionally, mentally depleted. You need to allow for that care as well. There's a question that Tanya's asked specifically around conflict. I think particularly if it is, we all want it to be an amicable split, but as I said, emotions are raging and you're not always at the same stage of the process emotionally in kind of coming to terms with the end of the relationship. Conflict is obviously quite common. I think having clear boundaries, having space, and having the right support enables you to be able to then manage that conflict. Also getting to that support in terms of the emotional and mental side of things, of trying to see it from a different perspective and reframing the situation Sam just did just then around, this is just a next chapter, and it's, it might be an uncomfortable or even painful transition, but there is something on the other side of this that I'm working towards, keeping an eye on that kind of end result and not letting your short-term interactions really jeopardize what you're trying to build, which ultimately is a effective co-parenting relationship. You don't have to be best friends. You don't have to be on holiday with them and their new partner in 6 months' time. I think there's kind of this media thing now that if you're not busy mates with your co-parent, then somehow you've failed and not quite hit the mark. It's not that either. It's different for everyone, and you need to allow time to grieve the relationship, allow for the fact that you're at different stages of that emotional journey that you're both on, that you're not always going to get it right, and nor is your co-parent. But if you can get to the point of facilitating, having that plan in place, having that some of the logistics ironed out, that will really help you. And also, I think trying to get to the bottom of some of the behaviour. In fact, it was Sam, and this quote that Sam said to me always rings in my head about the fact that criminal lawyers see really bad people at their best, and family lawyers see really good people at their worst, because it's their families, it's their kids, it's their loved ones. It's such a huge change, and you're not always going to behave in the best way with the best will in the world, and nor is chances are your co-parent. But trying to get to the bottom of what's the fear and where's the behavior coming from, and therefore where can you agree and remove some of that animosity and look for those areas that you agree, and then go, okay, so actually maybe we agree on 80% of this and it's just the 20% that we're not agreeing on, but actually that's down to our parenting style, that's not down to our divorce. And we need to allow for the fact that we might have slightly different rules in our homes, and that's okay. But I think sometimes we go, oh, it's a divorce, and therefore it's all about the divorce, and that's what's caused this sort of friction. And actually it's just the fact that you're different people with different values and purposes and at different stages of this journey. And I think just allowing for some of that, but having a plan, having some boundaries, really thinking about your communication and the roles that you now need to fill in order to still be that family is where I would put the focus. And honestly, get some support and some help. There are brilliant solicitors like Sam who will work with both of you. There are coaches like me who will work with both of you to get you around the table and build that new family dynamic and help you all move on.
just really quickly, I can see there's a couple of questions that I want to answer before we finish up. So in terms of Tanya setting precedents, that's a really good question. So the question is, does it set a precedent for the future in terms of what's affordable financially? Does it matter how long you do an interim plan? I think, again, what's crucial from a legal perspective is that you both agree that it's interim. So, and that can be as basic as sending an email going, totally accept, we both agree. And then the other one replying, yes, that this is a short-term plan and we don't know what the long-term finance is going to look like, because that can be a real impediment to a move. Is the idea that, say, you're in a 4-bed family home, you can afford a 1-bed flat to rent, and the person who is planning on moving out thinks, well, crikey, I don't want this to mean that long term a judge is going to say, oh, well, you can afford a 4-bed home and a 1-bed flat, so this is fair. That's not how a judge will look at it. They'll look at housing need in the long term on the basis of generally trying to achieve equivalence if that's affordable. Quite often that's not affordable, but something fair, and they won't hold it against one party, provided that everyone's super clear that it's interim. And I think the way you give each other that reassurance is literally by having it in an email and having you both agree to it. It doesn't have to be any formal legal document, but something that you could then, if things don't work out and you can't agree the long-term plans, you could say, well, look, stop using this current situation as a ballpark for the future, because it's not. And fundamentally, what happens when you divide your financial resources is that you each have to complete something called a Form E, which is quite a long legal document. We look at all of your assets, net of tax, earnings, future earnings, maintenance needs. It all gets looked at in the round. So it's actually impossible to sort of take one asset on its own and go, right, this is clearly the plan for this asset, because you'll end up missing out, and you'll end up with an outcome that isn't fair. It doesn't matter how long your interim arrangement is in place. To give you some idea of timescales, so the divorce process, which is the gov.uk application, that takes 6 months, and the idea when the government put that in place was that during those 6 months, you can agree the arrangements for your finances, agree the arrangements for your children, get a court order confirming the financial deal, because you need a separate court order for that, and then process your final divorce. Now, in actual fact, if you go to mediation or you come to shared legal advice for a service like the divorce surgery or others, you can do it within that time frame, because clients are normally with us for about 2 to 4 months. If you go through a two-sided process, the timescales are way off that. So, the average timescale for court proceedings on the finances in London was 3 years. Out of London was 2 years. So actually, the interim plan can be a plan that lasts quite a while. And again, that's a good thing to talk about in terms of, look, we don't know how long this divorce is going to take, but you know what I always say to people at the beginning is, let's set our stall. What timescale do we want? What's our budget? How much do we think is reasonable to spend on some legal advice? How much do we want to spend on a bit of co-parenting help? Maybe we need some tax advice. And then you can go to different providers and go, look, this is our joint budget. So we've got half each, essentially. Where's that going to get us? Because what happens too often is that people spend a disproportionate amount of money just getting divorced. And actually, divorce is a time when, you've got the same amount of money funding 2 households going forward. So you want to be prudent with your spending. But equally, these are really big decisions. So you don't want to do it with no advice at all. So it's sort of making that plan. But you can do that with your interim arrangements too. And go, look, we're hoping this will be 6 months. And in that time, this is what we want to achieve, and this is the help we're going to need to get there. And kind of just make it like you would a housing project, that you budget for your renovation, the steps you've got to get through, and make it a process that you go through, rather than just sort of walking into a solicitor's office and just saying, sort this for me, because all that will happen then is that it's out of your hands, and you need to, if you can, retain control over what is fundamentally your family life and your divorce. The other question I've got here is about ages children can decide, teenagers can decide. Yeah, so just so you've got some idea on this, from a legal perspective, the courts will want, I mean, not that you want to end up in court about your children, but so you know it, so that then you can factor that into your own thinking. Judges will want wishes and feelings reports from children, as young as 5. They'll get CACUS officers to talk to them and get their feelings. In terms of when their feelings become more and more determinative, you're right, the older they get, they do. You get to a certain age where judges will say, well, look, I've got a 14-year-old here. He's going to vote with his feet. There's only so much that I can impose on him. But having said that, judges will also, in those cases where you've got a 14-year-old, be very, very aware that they have a window where they could make a difference. And because from the age of 16, the court won't have jurisdiction to make orders over children. That's when their sort of ability to intervene ceases. So you quite often get situations with 14-year-olds where, I'll be in private practice, when I still do two-sided as a barrister, I represent one or the other, you'll have one parent who's saying to me, and I'm representing them, look, I've tried everything. They just won't go. It's not going to happen. But then if I were acting for the other side, they'd be saying, I know that if that child were given the right support, they might come, and I'm feeling like they're really enmeshed in all of the adult fallout, and I'm desperate to change it. And you can easily get a judge at 14 that says, yes, I appreciate this child's views, but I want to try and do something about this, because I know long term, if they don't have a decent enough relationship with both parents, it's not good for them. So I guess I'd say that, a teenager's views are really, really important, and you cannot force a teenager to do something they don't want to do. But what you can do is agree. And it can be as basic as literally just saying to the other parent, look, we both know that we have a strong-willed child. At the moment, this is their view. But I promise you, I am aligned with you on wanting to try and change that view. And let's see what we can do. And that's actually generally, so the cases that go to court about kids, and I see them a lot, they come from a place of fear. So they come from one parent who genuinely feels they're doing the right thing and they're following what the child wants, and the other parent is terrified that they're going to stop being a parent. And often if you can speak to that fear and go, I've got you, I want what you want, we've just got to figure out together how we can turn this tide on what our child's saying at the moment. And that's when you get, people like Nichole to help you. That's when lawyers are, we can't help on that. What we can help you with is how a judge might see it. But, I've had cases that on joint basis, couples come to me where they've been separated. I had one where they were separated for 3 years, 4 children, never stayed overnight with dad. Dad was kind of beside himself about it and about to go to court proceedings. Mum was saying, look, they just don't want to go. They love to see you for the day. They don't want to spend the night, and that's okay. You need to get to grips with that. And actually what they both needed was, dad just needed to hear mum go, I get it. I get why you want to stay. You want them to stay, and I'm going to try and help you. And mum needed to hear dad go, I get this isn't just about the kids. I get that I can't just have the kids and be completely oblivious to my relationship with you. I get that we need to work on our co-parenting relationship. And that while we're doing that, you're going to help me try and encourage the kids to see me more. So it's sort of taking it that dimension above with the adults. But I often find that, if one parent just says to the other, I totally get it, I really want the kids to see more of you. God, I'd love a weekend off. Then that gives them that relief that, oh my God, we are both going to the same ultimate goal, which can take the pressure off.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry, I've massively monologued now.
No, 100%. I think there is something about getting to that point in your co-parenting relationship, and this is what I was saying about, you don't have to be best friends, but you want to know that, if your teenager hasn't come home at the time that you said, or your youngest has a really high temperature, there is one person you're going to make a phone call to who is going to be just as worried as you are. And that's the point you want to get to in terms of or at least start out with your co-parenting relationship, of you are in this together and you're not enemies when it comes to raising your children. Easier said than done at times, but once the heat dies down, it is absolutely possible. we have slightly overrun, so we need to wrap it up. But I hope you all found that helpful, and I will be sending out the recording. Sam, did you want to talk about the next one that we're doing?
Yeah, so the next one is 21st of May. It's the same thing, like a lunchtime, just a quick one. But we'll be talking about a bit more of a deep dive into children. So child arrangements, how courts approach those, legal presumptions, practicalities of co-parenting, all of that stuff. So the next one is just about children, and it's 21st of May.
Yeah, and I will send you all the details of it on email as well, along with, as I said, the recording of this session. But thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. I hope you got a lot out of it. It was a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye.